Hi everyone, welcome to the first asynchronous session that we'll have in this school year. Well, I just want to check with you or revise some of the ideas you have been reading and you have been watching the videos about these economic sectors. So, economic sectors refer to the idea of how the structure of an economy is based. For example, we know now that primary sector basically extracts raw materials from nature. So we have had times in the economy where some sectors have been stronger or more important than others. So you may think of the late 19th century, early 20th century, a very primary sector based economy. So that is how wealth was accumulated. You could extract oil, so your economy would boom, or you could have steel, you could have minerals, and that is what economies were based on. So having and extracting those raw materials. So if we think of America, the United States, before Rockefeller, like Andrew Carnegie, he was very well known for developing the steel industry. So the railroads that connect the whole country were made on his muscle. So it was a very uh, the economy was very based on extracting, and if your country had the luck of having this, then perfect. So if you were a world power without natural resources, then we know what happened. So we know that, for example, England, the British Empire, had colonies, and they would extract minerals from the colonies. So that's why they embarked on expeditions to new places and new worlds and invasions and so forth. So this is the primary sector. Still, we have some countries that rely on this. We have as an example Africa. In Ghana, for example, it's a country that produces cocoa. So most of the chocolate that we think comes from Ecuador. Well, Ecuadorian chocolate is very good. I mean that the mass production of chocolate we sometimes comes from Africa, and we really don't know that. Even under the Nestle brand. So that country relies a lot on nature. Um, Venezuela is a country that I can talk about easily, so it's more or less the same thing. We were an oil exporter, so we never developed an industry to transform oil, and now we know what is happening. So if you want to be a healthy, strong economy, so you better have a balance. It's good to have diversity. Well, then the secondary sector. This sector is the sector that developed strongly after the Industrial Revolution. So technology had a lot to do with it. With this, is what to do now that we have that natural resource extracted. So the idea here of adding value appears. So wood is not enough. So we need to transform the wood into furniture. So the secondary sector does this transformation. So what country can we think about? Well, China is an example. China transforms, and it's cheap labor, the cheap value, or what is worth the manpower is so cheap that they just assemble, they just transform, so they get raw materials from many places, and then the transformation happens there. So probably there is not much innovation, probably. I mean to say that the economy is very based on transforming in a very efficient and cheap way. So this is how a country like China is building its wealth. Now it's not from extracting natural resources that it may not have. Now it is transforming raw materials from many industries. So we have Technology is very strong. As you know, the cell phones are manufactured there in a big share. We also have pharmaceuticals, we have car industry, so it's very diverse. It's not that they are specialized on one thing. Watches, cameras, so it's very diverse. It's all over the place. So China would be a good example of a secondary sector-based country. Now for the tertiary and quaternary, we tend to discuss them together. Well, why? Because it's service. So this is, if you think about the line that I showed you in class where we have the input, the first input is the raw material. Then we start adding value and transforming. So you take the wood, you turn the wood into a piece of furniture, and then you have a service company that may do something with the furniture. You could have an online shop where what you do is you have the e-commerce, you have the infrastructure to sell, the marketing power, and what you do is that when someone purchases from you, you go and buy that furniture from someone. So it's not you dealing with the wood, it's not you transforming the wood into a furniture. This is you just providing the service of selling. So this is a tertiary service. It could include transportation, it could include services in general. This is where I tell you that I tend to include here McDonald's. Well, why? You would say, well, McDonald's transforms bread and meat into a hamburger, whereas it is a secondary company. I would tend to say that the experience of a restaurant is more a service experience than a transformation experience. Probably the key of McDonald's is not the bun, the bread, and the meat, but what it means to go to McDonald's is the toy for the kid, is the smiling faces that you tend to find there. So it is about that. It is about an experience. So I would always argue that restaurants, like Starbucks, for example, it's closer to a tertiary company than to a secondary company. So there is that. So an example of this, well, this would be a country, an example of a country that doesn't have natural resources, that doesn't really transform much. Well, the United Kingdom could be a good example. They're more service-based. They're a service-based economy. We could argue that this is a higher realm, it's a higher level of economy where they were at some point very industrial, but they discovered that it was cheaper to manufacture elsewhere than in England. So what they did is now many of the British products, the traditional British products, are made someplace else, and what they do is the service, is the selling. Okay, then the quaternary is very similar, it's also service, but this is knowledge base. And we tend to think that this is the higher status, is the higher realm of the classification. Is now you not only given the service of the McDonald's, the Big Mac, and the Happy Meal, but now there is something, there is a know-how, there is a know-how that was creative and that is taking advantage of your strong point. So countries like this could be South Korea, could be Japan, the United States at some point, where big innovations happen. So we could have as an example California, for example. California on its own, it's the fifth largest world economy. And what happens there? Well, wine on one hand is wine, but that is not what makes it so strong. It is Silicon Valley, it is Google, it is Facebook, it is Microsoft, and these companies provide what? Well, a service. Okay, They are the fabric, they are the building bones of the modern e-commerce infrastructure. So there is where value is accumulating, right? So what do you need, if you think about this, what do you need to start a primary sector business? Well, you need a lot of resources first, because extracting from the ground is not cheap. So you need to have the financial power to purchase the machinery that would let you extract from the ground. You will need the government permissions. It's not easy. You will need to find the place where you can extract and what to extract. So starting this type of business is not cheap. It's not easy. It is very regulated. So it is very difficult. Now, for the secondary company, the secondary sector, is it easy to transform raw material? Well, no. You need infrastructure. You need a factory. You need people. You need machines. You need a line of production. So you would need a structure for that. Not as complex or not as expensive as primary, and not as regulated, because if you have the means, if you have the money, then you can make your factory. That is not an issue. But you still need this, so you will need a financial muscle. For the tertiary, well, you need, for the service, you need much less capital. Imagine a company like Uber or Globo, where it was at the beginning an idea to provide a service using what was already in the economy. So it was just the idea. So you can start that from scratch. So it is less regulated and it's less capital intensive. So you have that going on. And then the last one, the quaternary, is very similar to the tertiary, but you need knowledge. Knowledge is, in this economy, is very scarce. It is difficult to manage, it is difficult to control, and it is difficult to acquire. So we tend to say, and this is an opinion, for me, capitalism is over. It's old school, it's dead. Socialism and communism are dead too, but there's still some countries trying to push it. What is really driving the world nowadays is a knowledge-based economy. So we need to define an economic theory for a knowledge-based society. So we're living this process at school, where now everything is knowledge-based. Where if you think about the school as a company and as a knowledge-based company, what does the school have? Well, it has the desks, it has the building, yes, but how does the school really produce the money? Well, using the brains of the teachers. Can you control that? Well, no, you can manage it, but every day at 4 p.m., that asset, your teachers, the value creators, leave the school, and we could quit anytime. So this is the new type of business where your money making unit leaves the company every day and you don't know if they're coming back. So it's not like in the past where you know that oil was your thing, where you knew that if you had the machine and the raw material you could produce things. Now in the new economy, knowledge comes and goes. So we need to understand this as a process. When I said capitalism is dead, I meant as a pure economic system. Like, this is, for me, that war about capitalism versus communism is just old school. It's just not relevant anymore. We have to overcome that idea, take the best of capitalism as the only way to create wealth. And we must take some ideas from other systems, some mixed systems, to make sure that there is some equality that would give you sustainability. Because if societies are not sustainable, then they're doomed. They're doomed to being subject to protests. They're doomed to being subject to communism. Why? Why do I say that? Well, if you think about a country, well, let's think about Cuba because it's the example we have as the classic for Latin America. Cuba in the 50s and 60s was one of the most important and fast-growing economies in Latin America. And what happened? Well, Fidel Castro happened. If you think about Venezuela in the 70s and 80s, it was the leading economy in South America. And what happened in the 90s? Well, Chavez happened. If you think about Chile in the early 2010, the leading economy in South America, and what is happening in Chile? Well, now protests. So what is my point with this? That even though if the economy does well, if you don't take care of the building blocks of society, the people, if you let poverty accumulate, then communist ideas will jump. So it is not a coincidence that when a country is booming economically, then left-wing ideas rise. Why does this happen? Well, that is a conversation to be had another time. I think that we tend to forget the value of freedom. It has happened in the United States somehow. There is a strong sense of sympathy towards the left, which is dangerous. We will address this topic because it's relevant to the subject to understand the different political inclinations that countries have, because businesses take this into consideration when they decide where to invest. So this is why I bring this point. So well, it's been longer than I thought it would be. So primary sector, you extract natural resources. It is expensive, difficult, and regulated by governments. The secondary sector takes that raw material and transform it into something else. Tertiary sector will give you a service. And the quaternary sector would also give you a service, but this one is knowledge-based. Examples of primary, Ghana in Africa. Examples of secondary, China in Asia. Example of tertiary, England probably is a good example. The United States is a good example. And then finally, the quaternary sector. Well, the United States, California specifically, is a very good example. Japan also, even though Japan also manufactures a lot, the economy, how it is moved within Japan, it is very knowledge based. Well, with this, it's been almost 20 minutes, so I hope you see this video before doing the activity. So what you have to do now is I'll leave you there on Classroom a question. What you have to do is answer that question in at least 120 words. So what do I recommend? Well, you should have at least 2 or 3 paragraphs to make it an effective piece of writing. Please give me an introduction, then develop your idea. What is the main point you want to give me? And then give me a conclusion. You cannot add new ideas in the conclusion. So the conclusion must be the discussion of what you explained in the previous paragraphs or paragraph. You may need to watch videos, you may need to read a little bit more because it's kind of an open question. So well, I leave that there. have fun. If you need me, just write a comment in the forum section on this post. Thank you.